I'm pretty good about this Zoom today.
Yeah, you're crushing it. Sweet.
Just have to mute this
I'm gonna spread out just a tiny bit so it doesn't look quite so funny.
one. There's Clayton, sir. Got everyone. Hey, Jim. All right. So we are now live and we are starting our Personnel and Ordinance Committee meeting at 2:38 on October 10th. And all of our trustees are in attendance, as well as Katie with CPS and Lucy and our planning coordinator, and then Clayton Buckner, our attorney. So I'm gonna pass it off to Lucy to introduce. In your packet, there's a draft ordinance, and at first I was gonna make Lucy take all her comments out and put it in a agenda memo for you all. And then we decided that's unnecessary work and probably best to leave the comments where they fit in the ordinance. So yeah, hopefully you all can see that there's comments on the side of this ordinance that we're gonna kind of run through to talk through this, but this ordinance is for establishing a historic review committee separate than the planning commission. And also in line with certified local government standards. And we do have a lot of options in here. So Lucy's kind of gonna walk you through some of these options on kind of how to structure this committee. And then we can go through it. Does that sound like a plan?
Awesome. Great. Thank you. Yeah, so the bulk of this came from the Colorado CLG, their kind of draft ordinance. And so I kind of workshopped it to fit some of the comments that I got from our last board meeting, and just some things that we've traditionally done in town. So this is definitely a rough draft, and things can be changed and adjusted. And there's a lot of opportunity there's a lot of options in here that we can go through. So I was thinking of just kind of going through page by page and just kind of highlighting the comments and giving you all an opportunity to make a comment, or if there's something in there that you saw that you think should be changed, you can call it out then. Does that sound good with everyone?
Sounds great.
Awesome. All right, so page 1 starts with the purpose, and they gave me a bunch of purpose statements, but I will also be meeting with the Historical Society tomorrow, and we'll hopefully get a few purpose statements from them as well. And if you all have any purpose statements, those can also be added here. And then we go through our definitions, which are pretty basic. And then we get to our historic district definition, and we can talk about this later too. But I think we kind of need to think about what is our historic district. We have our historic overlay, and then we also have our architectural overlay districts, which overlap and are both, they kind of have a similar process and go through the current historic review board and planning commission. So I think one thing to think about is whether or not we want to combine these or keep them separate, or kind of what that will look like. But there's a comment below for where we can kind of have a conversation about that. But that's one thing to think about.
You want to run through the whole thing or discuss as you go?
Let's discuss as we go. Let's discuss A-Rod in the historic district when it comes up again, though. So then we have our historic register. Katie is right now working on a town GIS map. And so one thought would be that this is something that could go on that GIS map. Okay, next page, section 2, the historic review committee. I'm going to change number 1 because we already have a historic review committee established. And then this will kind of make changes to what is currently chapter 16, article 2 Division 4 Historic Review Committee. Yes,
Do we have a historic review committee established? The county does, but I don't believe the town does. Isn't that what we clarified recently?
no, I mean, in the codes, so if you go to that section of the codes.
Oh, I agree that we've got a code provision
Mhm.
that describes a historic review committee for the town,
Mhm.
but I don't believe that we currently have a historic review committee formed because all that exists is the county historic review committee. And that's what we realized was the confusion previously, is there's like Bev,
Mhm.
Fitz, Fetch.
Mhm.
I don't know who else is on it, but that's a county committee and they understand their role as a county committee,
Mhm.
I think. And
So I think you're talking about the Historic Impact Assessment Committee, which is and they only do work in the county.
okay,
But then how I understand it is the Planning Commission is the Historic Review Committee. And those just work together.
and then didn't they ask us to separate that though?
That's why.
So that's why we're doing this.
Got it. And so I just was confused and I just want to make sure that it's super clear as we're talking through this. You said we already have one established.
Right.
So, okay, we technically have it established, but
Right.
we're being asked to separate it out.
Mhm.
And this is the mechanism for doing that.
Right.
Got it.
And we're using the template for CLG committee to help us separate that out from the planning commission.
Got it. When we present this at the town level, I think it's really important to figure out how to provide that background, because if
Right.
I'm a little confused
Mhm.
or that anyone who isn't on the planning commission is even more confused than I am. And I assume the planning commission's like got this pretty figured out, but I think it'd be really helpful to provide that context.
Okay, yeah. So this is the separation of the two.
Copy that.
In line with CLG standards. And so hopefully we can come up with good language for that and put that in number 1 of this ordinance. So going to number 2, in terms of the composition. So this is kind of where I took some of what we talked about during the last meeting, and kind of who would make up this committee. So this is a combination of CLG requirements, existing requirements, and kind of the direction I got the last time we talked. And so it would look like 1 member of the Board of Trustees, 1 owner and year-round resident of the Historic Overlay District, 1 year-round resident of the town at large, a member of the Historical Society, a member of the San Juan County Historic Impact Assessment Review Committee, which is the county kind of historic review committee. A non-trustee planning commission member, a non-voting high school member, and a non-voting staff member. So looking for kind of what you guys think about this composition.
I think this is too many people.
Too many people?
I think there should be 5 voting members as opposed
Okay.
to 7.
Okay.
But what Sally and Jim and Katie, you see a lot of this stuff. What do you guys all think?
Shane, I agree with you. I gestured as well. I agree with you.
Okay.
I agree with 5, but I think that list is a good list. And I was wondering when I read through it, if there's a way of kind of saying like, must have, of those 5 members, must have, 1 that falls into this category, 1 that meets the requirements of this category. Because I think what that list is intended to do is to have representation, that's to create representation. And I think, the intent behind that is important to state. And I'm not suggesting that we overcomplicate things, but I think just, fully removing those descriptors is sort of a loss for the document, because I think it's important to say, like, ideally, we have this as a representative for this reason. And so looking at the list here, for example, potentially there's a cluster for like representation from the historic review, from the historical society. And I think within the list, there are some potential overlaps where, let's see, like there's the Historical Society, there's Historic Impact Assessment Review Committee. I don't know who's on that committee, I guess.
That's
Trying to think of.
that committee is that's
what you were referring to earlier.
Brett's
David Singer.
David Singer.
So that sounds a lot like the Historical Society right now.
Yeah.
I guess I'm just and not to say that would be true in the future as well, but I'm wondering if there are ways of combining those strategically.
So my recommendation would be deleting the year-round at-large resident, because everybody else on the committee is going to be a year-round resident anyway. And I would delete the Historic Impact Assessment Committee member
Okay.
and the high school member. Or I'm sorry, I've screwed up. So I don't have.
Because now we're at.
Sorry, I would keep a member at large, like who has to be a year-round resident.
Okay.
But I would remove the Historic Impact Assessment person, and that's one, and then I would take out the high school member as two. Because I think it'd be great to have the high school member be like an informal thing, but I don't think they should have a full voting role.
They're not, they would be non-voting.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
what I was gonna say, is that I asked Lucy about the amount of people yesterday, and she had a good point that I didn't, maybe it's clarifying this language, also the way it's written. She doesn't have all of those people as voting members. So you can see non-voting there, and I think she actually only has 5 or 6 voting members. So I think everyone's kind of on the same page, but maybe it takes clarifying and separating the non-voting members into a different category. Might help.
Copy that.
Yeah.
So then I would say like high school member, when available, comma, non-voting member. And I would still delete the impact assessment person, because I feel like they're already either them or the planning commission, but not both, because that ends up being pretty duplicative, I think.
That was where I was headed, is like either, they become the same line, they get combined. Checking that box would happen when either one or the other is serving as a voting member.
Okay, so an or thing.
Or
So,
just delete, or I'm comfortable with what Shane is suggesting too, just deleting. But if the intent behind that is to say that we are looking for the input from that organization or an organization that covers a similar terrain in our community, then leaving both is fine, as long as it's either or type of category.
The alternative, and I defer to Lucy, Gloria, and Katie, is not having 2 separate resident members that aren't on one of these committees. They'll be the least informed, I think, potentially. And just having one resident member that's either just a member at large and they don't have to own in the historic overlay district, or not having the member at large and just having the member who's a year-round resident and a historic overlay district property owner.
Mhm.
But I would defer to you all in terms of like whether you want more like at-large community input or more informed, already involved in the process input.
One thing I'll note here is that 40% of members need to be professionals in areas of history, architecture, landscape architecture, American studies, American civilization, cultural geography, cultural anthropology, planning, or archaeology. So by having more members and by having the year-round at-large member, that just creates more opportunity for professionals for us to allow professionals into the group and kind of fill that need.
I think that's a great point, Lizzie.
Yeah. Cool.
So are we happy with the 6 listed, or do we want to take one out? Take out the impact assessment or combine the impact assessment in this historical society?
I guess back to whatever you think, as long as we've got 5 voting members.
Okay.
Those are a lot of the same people. I think it might make sense to combine those based on what Sally said.
Okay.
Good point, if you have a lot of the same people on both.
Okay. That sounds great. Okay, thank you for that.
you for this.
And then next, a lot of these committees do not require 100% of their members to be residents of the town. So I just wanted to throw that out there. If we wanted to do at least 60% of members need to be Silverton or county residents, or if we want to stick with all members need to be Silverton or county residents, or all members need to be Silverton residents.
I would advocate for all members being town of Silverton residents.
Okay, that makes sense.
I'm open to disagreement on that one. Okay.
Everyone agrees on that one? Okay, awesome.
Cool.
All right. And then last time we talked, we discussed how we would stagger terms. And this was kind of dependent on what the composition would look like. So I was just kind of wondering how we'd want to stagger them and how we would want to recruit them. We had talked about pulling a member from the planning commission and pulling a member from the board of trustees and having them serve 1 year while other people serve multiple years in order to stagger. But we wanted to wait until we knew the composition. So do people still like that idea of pulling a trustee and a planning commission member and giving them 1 year? Or another option is we could have certain members only serve for 1 year and certain members serve for 3 years.
I was thinking about the administrative challenge of a 3-year term. It could work out really well, but I was thinking that, because we have trustees, for example, that like one of the roles is only 2 years.
Right.
And depending on when we create this or someone gets appointed relative to their overall term, like if someone, and it really only relates to the trustee seat, I think, because the rest of and maybe the planning commission seat, I'm not sure what the terms are on the planning commission, but I was just thinking like what happens, it should be the lesser of like whatever the term is and their appointment on one of the committees, if that's the seat that they're in. So for like the board of trustees role, if someone, if their term is up on the board of trustees or they resign or something like that, they have to leave even if they had a 3-year term. Same thing for planning commission member. But I just didn't know if the 3-year term made that more complicated.
Right.
And if it should just be 1 and 2. But again, I defer to you. I don't know.
I mean, I guess if we were to start this next year in 2023, which is kind of the goal, then we would potentially have a couple members of the board of trustees that would be up just for another year before their next election. So that might actually work with staggering. I don't know the planning commission terms, so I'd have to look at those, but that might be an idea. It might actually work out with those timings. So I guess we'll just have to research a little bit more on the timing of it. And then that would kind of indicate who is eligible to serve on this for like another year or so.
Okay.
I think this makes sense to me, but maybe it isn't logical, but I was thinking that the like at-large member or members would have the longer terms because those are the people that are probably professionals that we're pulling from the community that aren't tied to another like elected seat or something like that. And they may be harder to replace. Whereas you could pretty much take anyone off the town trustee board who is going to be well informed, I think, in terms of like the master plan and what the goals and vision of the overall town is. I think those seats could rotate a little faster if we wanted to. Historical society is kind of interesting because I don't know how many members there are of the historical society, but if we limit them to 1 year, and that's also like, we're going to cycle through all of them pretty quickly. And that might be better as a longer term too. But I was thinking about these things more as like practical things than like political or anything else.
I was kind of thinking a similar thought that having the members that are at large and aren't tethered to a particular term limit it's just beneficial to have them serve a longer term potentially. And because if you're serving as a member at large, you're kind of getting up to speed on like the policies and procedures piece, whereas someone who's already serving and going to 8 billion meetings doesn't really need that sort of like they're already familiar like with what Shane said, the master plan, or just even the overall proceedings of meetings and things like that. So those terms could potentially be shorter, but that's all I thought about it. I do think that, you know, having a person serve any longer than 3 years, I think sounds long. 3 years sounds good. And I think over time, 1 year seems a little short, but I think, because I think there is just a learning curve to this kind of work. Like after a year, if you're only meeting 4 times a year even, I'm not sure. I don't know. 1 year just may eventually seem short, but I get the idea that we're staggering members and we're trying to get it off the ground. So I'm not sure how important that is at this point, but.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you can reapply as much as you want. So hopefully the 1 year people would maybe just continue to serve. But yeah, maybe it sounds like maybe I could create some options for the next time we talk about this. And kind of with some research and some ideas about how long terms are, and come back to this one.
Cool. I'd also like to request that we put in term limits.
Term limits, okay.
Like maybe no more than like 2 consecutive terms.
Okay.
And it doesn't need to be like lifetime term limits. I'm fine. Like if they do 2 on, 1 off, they could do 2 on again, something like that. I think would be fine.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, awesome. Next thing to note is number 7, powers and duties. So this ordinance does give the Historic Review Committee more responsibility than they have had in the past through the Planning Commission. And we'll get into more of that as we continue going through this. But one thing I wanted to stop and talk about here is whether or not we want the Historic Review Committee to be an advisory committee or a standalone committee when we're talking about reviewing applications in the historic district for alterations or to build a house or to build a building. Because right now it is a standalone committee. And last time we talked, it sounded like people were interested in making it an advisory committee.
What do you guys think?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll go maybe quick. I'd like to hear arguments on both sides. I think when we're saying, I think one of the, to zoom out a little bit on this question, what I hear from the community, and I think is a tension between creating efficiency and making restoration and making an old building enticing to want to own and restore is sometimes at odds with the processes involved in doing that type of work. And I think what I hear in this is like, is this an extra meeting? Is this, something that's going to be meaningful to property owners, or how, as well as protective for the town and the character of the town and the integrity of the buildings. And I think it's just a matter of figuring out how those two interests can avoid competing with each other. Because I think creating inefficiencies in the process in order to maintain the historical integrity of our building is a bad way to go about this. So it seems like it would behoove the town to create a process, whether that's advisory or something with more power to it or authority. I think the idea is that it's beneficial for the town in the way that we want to protect and care for our buildings, that aren't technically ours. They're owned by private land, private property owners, but also not, I am very opposed to creating something that just becomes an added inefficiency to people who want to do awesome things with their properties. So that's the lens I'm coming at it with. And Lucy, maybe you can provide like, a little bit of insight, or Katie, on, which structure sort of strikes the right balance there.
Yeah, I don't mind speaking a little bit. First, I will say definitely understand the community's needs and wants to go have a quick review. And that's common everywhere. I think also Silverton has a very quick process. For example, I was on a meeting with another client this morning, and the applicant said, well, how long? And the town said 9 to 12 months. And that's just to get through planning. And it wasn't an exaggeration. It's just their processes and timelines are very long. So I think you already have a very short timeline where you want to encourage to keep that, but I also think you're okay to stretch it out a little bit. And I think people will adjust to that. I think the question that comes in is, advisory makes sense if you can put it next to the planning commission also, because the other factor of this is what happens if someone is in this district and they need to go to this committee, but they also have a use proposed that may be going to planning commission, for example. Are you going to have them go through this, and then you're going to have them go to planning commission, and then you're going to have them go to board of trustees? And I think it's just making sure those three processes stay closer together through the way it's written to keep that timeline together. But I don't think there's a harm in adding an extra meeting for applicants. I think it seems burdensome to the town and to the property owners, but it's very normal everywhere to have multiple meetings and to go through an extremely lengthy process. So if you put the historic commission meeting a week before the planning commission, say, and that would come down to the question Lucy has of how often should it meet. I think it may be worth leaving it as an option to meet once a month, because you don't want to have them meet quarterly, and then you're obviously going to really delay it if you're going to require somebody to go to them and they just had a meeting and now you've got 3 months until they meet again. So I think if you have them meet, if there's business, once a month, and you try to maybe have it the week before planning commission, you've got them leading, giving a recommendation. You've got planning commission reviewing, giving a recommendation. If planning commission has to review that application, also going to board of trustees after that. I don't see a problem based on how people are getting more and more used to the extra meetings, and not that you're throwing an extra meeting in, you're only throwing an extra meeting because it's the historic district and you care about what the town looks like. And you have this committee you're developing to have expertise in this, where the planning commission and the board of trustees should be looking at that recommendation. They shouldn't count on learning it themselves and becoming experts in every topic. So my thought is I would encourage the option for once a month meetings for this committee, and then also have people go to them and not look at it as a burden. Because I think a lot of your applicants are going to have to go to planning commission because you have so many applicants that go to planning commission, whether they're in the historic district also, or they need a use by special review, or they're in steep slopes, they're in avalanche. You have a lot of different things in town. They go to planning commission. I think Lucy got in 6 applications in the last 10 days. So that would be, in my mind, a reason to encourage more meetings of this committee, but still have them look at it. That's your expert. That's who you want to be your experts in the town on historics. So.
Cool. Thank you, Katie. That made me think about a couple things. The interplay between the planning commission and this committee is really interesting. It seems like it could be really frustrating to have them work completely in parallel, and maybe it would be better for them to be stacked. So for example, like if they go to this meeting and then they go to the planning commission meeting, and they get approved from a historic perspective, but they get recommended not approved from a use perspective, they would have spent a bunch of money preparing for like design on historic potentially. So my thought is planning commission happens first, but then before the planning commission recommendation comes to the town board, it would then go to the historic review committee. assuming the planning commission recommended approval of that use and they want to proceed.
I think
And
that makes
also,
total sense. I
Cool.
like that. Mhm.
nice, and that also might limit the frequency of these meetings, because if you have, and then if it's a request that doesn't have a change in use and doesn't need to go planning commission, then it goes straight to the historic review committee. And then if both of them are still recommendation committees and are treated the same, I think that also, it makes the process a little more standardized and clear, because I imagine the most complicated version is they go to the planning commission, they both go to the planning commission, they get a conditional approval.
Mhm.
Maybe they like go back, iterate, go back to the planning commission to fix some of the conditions. Then it goes to the historic review committee.
Mhm.
Either gets rejected or approved there as well. And then assuming the applicant is still happy with both recommendations of approval or conditional approval, then it comes to the board to consider the whole package of planning commission and historic review committee at the same time.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
I like that.
So I like that stacking, but then it makes me think that the historic review committee needs to be more than advisory.
How come?
Because something could go through the planning commission and be at odds with, historic standards. And at that point, it puts the town trustees on the hook for enforcing the historic standards. And I think it puts the town trustees in the position of kind of doing what Katie was saying earlier, being experts on the topics of, all the materials or all of the design features or whatever it is. It still puts the trustees in that position, because I'm batting this idea around, I guess. Let me just confess to that. I'm not opposed to the board, to the committee as a advisory board. I just think I appreciate the relationship between those two entities, the planning commission and the historic review. I think Shane spoke really well about how those could align and be stacked in a way that's efficient for the town and the county and the property owner. I just, I can just see something kind of coming through the planning commission, property owners thinking that they've kind of got the stamp that they need, and the historic review elements being like second thought kind of.
So Sally, I think I initially disagree, but I'm open to being convinced otherwise. I think the planning commission is mostly going to be talking about use, and then, does it conform to, if it's a historic building already, it's already going to be either grandfathered to not having setbacks or height or other things like that. So you're not really looking at too much of the conforming to zoning code, like build restrictions, but they're the expert on that either way, or it's a new build that needs to fit within the historic overlay district. And so they're still going to be thinking about the elements that are in the code that the planning commission cares about. And then the historic review committee is going to have the mostly aesthetic, I think, considerations. Like, does this fit
Totally
within our design? And so in the process, it's like, once they get, they're 90% there, once they get the use, it's like what we did with Columbine Park. So it's like we had the design, the layout, and then it was just the aesthetic wasn't quite right. And then we went through this messy process of figuring out how to get all the input for it to be sufficiently historic looking. And that was an additional design cost and process. But I feel like if we'd done that first, we could have gotten, and then there was some type of material change we needed in terms of what the planning commission scope would review. That seems like that would be problematic. And I don't know what I don't think the trustees necessarily have to be experts if the historic review committee makes a recommendation and the applicant has a problem with it and they're asking us to weigh in on the disagreement between the historic review committee and the applicant. I think we have to defer to the historic review committee's recommendation for those expert level things. But if it's a practical issue, it costs $500,000 instead of $10,000 because of the thing they're asking, then I think we table it and we go back to the historic review committee, and we still don't make that determination outside of our board scope. We're either supporting the recommendation or not, I think. Does that make sense?
So you're the board is kind of acting in that scenario as kind kind of the checks and balances, so that if the planning commission and the historic review committee are in conflict in what they're advising or to move forward with this project, then the board is kind of the final, like, okay, no, it does have to go back to the planning commission. No, it does have to go back to the historic review, and then we'll reconsider it.
Yeah, and I think the most complicated situation is where the applicant disagrees with one of the recommendations, and they're asking the board to override the recommendation, in which it would have to be a very unique situation for the board to choose not to take either the historic review committee or the planning commission's recommendation and to make a different decision. And I think if either recommends rejection, like, we're probably going to reject it.
Jim, what do you
Jim, what do you think?
think? I'm curious.
Well, I'm for smaller government, less committees. But I think this is a good one because being on the planning commission as long as I have now, I see the need for it, and I see the component and how they all fit together in a marriage of sorts, and having those meetings staggered. I'm touching on all the topics. Having the meeting staggered is paramount for the builder, for the home buyer, for that individual who is endeavoring into resurrecting these older structures within the historic district. I'm all about less red tape than more, but I, more than anyone else, appreciate the need for the historic review and to keep the integrity and the aesthetics of our historic district and historic Silverton because of our historic designation. More than anyone else, I mean, we have that true historic designation, and keeping that is what we need to endeavor towards. So yeah, I'm for this. This process is good. This conversation is fantastic. We don't need more members. We just need to make it more uniform and bring it all together, and then move on to the next topic. I'm really good at this.
Jim, what do you think about recommending versus what's the opposite of that? Advisory versus
Standalone.
for me again? Standalone, thanks.
It needs to, in my opinion, it's an advisory, just as the planning commission is. We're looking to build a team, and these teams, the team is made up of experts, quote unquote. And it goes from one advisory to the next advisory. And the way that process works is it does come down to the trustees, and it needs to come down to the trustees for that final up or down, yes or no, thumbs up, thumbs down vote. And that is our job. And that's why we were voted into these positions, is to understand where we are, understand where we've been, but also understand where we're going as a community. And keep intact some of these things that we need to work for, which is a part of the historic district like we're talking about right now. But no, it needs to be an advisory. You can't have folks coming in and that are not elected. They're not in any way, shape, or form government employees, and giving thumbs up or thumbs down votes and having that be gospel. That's my opinion, but that's where I stand on that.
I have a question for you, Jim, also. So if we were to make this really a parallel with the planning commission, the one non-advisory function that they have that we just experienced was the adoption of the master plan. Would this committee, so in here, in the current draft, they recommend the construction and design guidelines. Would we want for them to be able to have the authority to adopt the construction and design guidelines independent of the trustees? And then we're kind of, or do we want to keep that at the trustee level?
I think it needs to be at the trustee level. We are the individuals that are elected by the public to ensure the trust. We're there to do the job. And some of these, and I'm not just gonna say this or limit us to this discussion, but we're there to make those tough decisions. We're there to make those tough calls. And I think I said it at the last meeting, that John F. Kennedy quote about you can give a man a gold bar and he'll still find something wrong with it. Advisory commissions are just that. But when it comes down where the rubber meets the road, we take all that information, we have to filter it, and then we make a decision going forward. That's how I see it.
Thank you. I agree with Jim as well.
Yeah. Well, okay. So I do too, even though I know 5 minutes ago I didn't. You're very persuasive, Jim. No, I'm most persuaded by, I think I think it's better to be an advisory board and have elected officials making those decisions at the end of the day. I think being accountable to voters is the ultimate in that position, and that makes a lot of sense to me.
Okay, awesome. So move towards advisory.
Great conversation.
Yeah. Before we move on from number 7, I just want to go through the powers and duties because they are different. So quickly, conduct surveys and create inventories of properties and areas for the purpose of defining those of historic significance, review and determine qualifications of buildings, structures, objects, sites, districts for nominations and recommendations that the Board of Trustees designate ordinance such buildings, structures, object sites, qualifying for a designation of basically a historic property. Recommend to the Board of Trustees the establishment of construction and design guidelines, make recommendations on applications, participate in review of National Register, the National Register of Historic Places, advise and assist owners on physical and financial aspects of preservation, rehabilitation, restoration, develop and assist in public education programs, advise the Board of Trustees on matters related to preserving the historic character and substance of the town, participate in federal section 106 review as requested by the Board of Trustees, and actively pursue financial assistance for preservation related programs. So 2 things that really stick out are the financial aspects. I interviewed a lot of planners in certified local governments, and a lot of them do not do this. This is something I would probably recommend taking out unless we could find a really good training for the committee, unless you all think otherwise.
What was the concern expressed by those planners and why they didn't do it with or without the training?
Mostly because it's just a lot of information to know. And it's also telling someone kind of how to deal with their finances can be a liability. And these community members are volunteers. So a lot of them just don't really want to make that time commitment or kind of present any liability issues. I don't really see that many liability issues. That's just kind of what I heard from them, because this would mostly be kind of talking about grants or tax programs. But those were some concerns.
Could we find a middle ground? Is there like the ability to maintain a database of available funding sources or grants as opposed to facilitating and recommending the process?
Yeah.
Because then it's just like we have a website page that has links to resources for people to search themselves.
Yeah.
But we could take the responsibility, or this committee could take the responsibility for like maintaining that set of resources, because they're probably going to hear about more stuff, like more new opportunities and other things than someone else might.
Right.
And it'd be nice to have like a formal obligation to like provide that as a resource.
And were you thinking that would fall under the committee or that would fall under the staff, or both?
Well, I think that's a good bigger conversation than this whole section, where like as you read through each of these items, I was hearing a massive amount of staff work and not hearing a massive amount of like committee responsibility. So for example, like the conducting surveys and creating inventories of properties, like I would be surprised if the way that this goes is like you sit down the first meeting and you delegate members to like go do that. That's going to be staff responsibility, and then bringing those surveys and inventories for review to the committee. But I'm seeing a lot of the substantive work here is most likely falling on staff. And my main question here was like, you know, do we have staff capacity with Katie and you to take on this scope of responsibility, or does it need to be narrowed down somewhat?
It's a good point.
Same thing was for like the construction design guidelines, like the initial draft of that is going to come from you.
That would probably come from, we'd probably have to contract someone to do that.
Gotcha. And well, it's facilitated by staff, but it's not like the committee members are going to be like sitting in a room.
Oh, yeah.
On a draft. So I was
That's
really
true.
thinking about, like, it feels like that board would function very similarly to the town board
Right.
in terms of like who's doing the work, and then the members of the committee are like providing like feedback as opposed to heavy lifting. So I just don't want you all to have to commit to stuff that's going to be untenable.
Right. Yeah.
How much of this can we take out, Lucy?
We cannot take out the surveys.
Right?
We can't take out. We could take out C. We could probably take out F. Instead of, and so they wouldn't really advise, they would really just review. Development assist.
The public education programs, I feel like that might be already done with our historic society as far as those outreach programs. I'm not sure if we want to be duplicative.
That's true. Yeah, we could probably have that responsibility. That is required for CLGs, but that we could have that responsibility fall on the historical society.
Is J something that they'd be doing on behalf of the applicants, or is that on behalf of the town? To actively pursue financial assistance for preservation related programs?
It would be probably, I think probably both. There are a lot of programs for homeowners specifically, or property owners specifically. But yeah, I mean, I think a lot of these things, I don't really see the committee doing themselves without staff. And that is something, actively pursuing financial assistance for preservation related programs on the town level is something staff would already be doing, most likely. So we could probably take J out too. And I can run all of this by Lindsay from CLG as well. So if we want to kind of.
So I have two kind of conflicting perspectives
Okay.
about scope of responsibility. One is that it's a lot to take on what's listed here, but also the town really has a vested interest in providing these services because it's the historic nature of the town and the physical infrastructure. And I think of like Jim and I are interesting examples where I think Jim's a great steward of the historic nature of the town and looking only at facade specifically, and I'm not right now. And I don't have the capacity financially or educationally to like figure out what I need to do to update the Wyman. And I look at these responsibilities of the committee as being like a massive help. And then I look around town and see all the other dilapidated exteriors that we have. And, you know, this being a way for us to give the entire town a historic makeover over a decade or so. But finding the right balance of like, you know, how can we provide the maximum support to influence that positive makeover without putting us in a position where we're really kind of like stepping outside what the town's responsibility is for, you know, supporting private property owners. So.
Right. And I think that this is a good thing to bring up because I think we can ask Lindsay I think there's probably a lot of resources that CLG has for us to lean on, and probably a lot of things we can put on our website that show kind of tax cuts or grant programs that you could apply to where we wouldn't really have to do that work. It would be more CLG doing the work. So I will ask about that one and get back to us about that. Jim?
Hey, thank you. I agree with Shane. It has been, it was a daunting task in the very beginning to work with all the organizations, to work with individuals who had all sorts of opinions. My vision is creating, and I don't know if we can do this, but kind of like for housing, creating a one-stop shop to where it's like historic review 101. You go in there, you download this PDF, you have it, you can hold it, you can print it out, take it home with you, do whatever you want with it. But then you have to educate yourself, so then when you come back to this committee, you better be prepared or you're going to get shoveled off to Buffalo. It is really up to the homeowner or that business owner, the contractor, whomever, to educate themselves. But I envision this this body, this advisory committee, doing just that and being a true advisory board and having those tools there readily available. I mean, I don't know if it's too hard to put links up on the site where you can go and click on this and you can click on that. And you can educate yourself along the way and take some of that burden off the staff and also off that committee, because that individual, if they've done their homework, should already have a degree of education already there when they walk in.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know if I answered the question or made my statement. I'm not as eloquent as everybody else.
Oh, I think
That was great.
Sally.
Oh, yeah, we lost Sally. I think on F, maybe the specific revision is something like maintain a digital library of resources with respect to physical and financial aspects of preservation, rehabilitation, something like that. And then I would be in full support of whatever skinnying down of this list you feel is reasonable without kind of taking the meat out of what this committee actually does.
Okay.
Or putting it in a way where it's like the committee has the guidance to take this on, but not the obligation.
Right.
It becomes untenable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that sounds good. I'll talk to Lindsay, see what we can knock off, see what resources we have, and then edit this list.
Great.
All right.
I also want to comment that the presentation of this and the comment suggestions is like incredibly well done. Like this is a complicated potential ordinance, and you really facilitated it masterfully. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Next is meetings, which we already kind of discussed. I recommended doing meetings after or before the planning commission, but it kind of sounds like it might make sense to do it before. But I'll put in options, kind of comments for both. And that doesn't need to be in the ordinance.
Oh, I think they said after. So planning commission, historic review committee, and then board.
It seems like
Yeah.
substance and aesthetic.
Uh-huh.
Okay. So that's what we want finalized. Okay, sweet. All right. Historic districts. So when this change happens, anything in the historic overlay district will go to the historic review committee, and it won't see the planning commission it will see the planning commission. But we also have A-Rod, which is overlapping, and also extending, but they're very similar in the way they're written in the codes. So we need to make a decision whether we're gonna combine them, keep them separate, or what we want to do there. And the A-Rod, for some historical background, Lisa has told me the A-Rod was established to kind of create more stringent regulations for not only that area, but also for the historic review district. So they were kind of created together. Or one was created off of the other.
So I don't know what the right decision is, but I could provide a little more context because I was advocating for the A-Rod when we first adopted it, because so the difference between the historic overlay district and the A-Rod is that the A-Rod is almost entirely undeveloped land, and the historic overlay district, there's infill left, but it's mostly existing historic. And the reason that we prioritized the A-Rod and got it done so quickly is that we're concerned that someone could come in and do a massive amount of development relative to town that's very visible, that would not at all be, there would be no oversight or like bookends for what was acceptable. Yeah. So I don't think we ended up including Shrine Hill in it, but that was another thing that we were looking at because it's like it's so visible from all aspects of town. But there was a really good reason, but Lisa at the time had said like, let's take that out because that just overcomplicates everything. And we have major infrastructure challenges with developing Shrine Hill. So we also felt like maybe we had a little more time to figure out how to handle that. That all said, I think there's potentially different requirements that apply to the existing historic and new developments. But I probably shouldn't be involved in that conversation any more than that because I own a large parcel of land that's in the A-Rod. So however this discussion continues beyond like me providing the background, I don't think I should be involved in. And sorry, I should have thought of that 3 minutes ago and I apologize.
So Jim, I guess it's up to you for discussion right now.
I also be able to like, if you'd like me to leave.
I think in all sincerity, that was very nice of Shane to say, but I think for the time being, I mean, everything he said is true. It's real. He doesn't have to leave. It looks like he's walking out of the room, but he shouldn't have to. Because this is a subcommittee. We don't actually make the rules in here. We just come in here and talk about it and provide direction. But since it looks like he's already gone. What was the question again?
Yeah, so we have the architectural review overlay district and the historic overlay district. Right now, the architectural review overlay district goes to the historic review committee. And it's overlapped with the historic overlay district. So what we could do is we could combine them and review them by the same standards, combine them and review them, or not combine them, but send them both to the historic review board and review them by different standards. Or we could send A-Rod applications minus anything in the historic overlay district to the planning commission rather than the historic review committee. Or we could continue sending it to the historic review committee and just having them have different standards in place to review those applications.
When we first endeavored into the A-Rod and we had these discussions with Lisa Adair, at that time, that's the subcommittee was made up of myself, Shane, and Molly Barella, and it was to protect the historical integrity of the downtown and of the areas that are the most visible to and from the business district that would have the most impact if someone came in with some radical design to change everything. The more that we walked the path with the A-Rod, we felt that it might need more teeth. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but I know that at the time we definitely felt that it needed a little bit more behind it as far as the reviews, as far as the input, mainly because we're trying to protect the historical aspect of that corridor. And it has played a big role on a couple of projects that fell into that district. And I think it's one that we need to keep, and we need to work harder to galvanize that process and make it so that it's not just, oh, another hoop. No, this is an actual, this overlay, this district needs to be respected and seen because it's for the protection of our entire community. So everything that Shane said was true, and I truly, and I know that he's a landowner and all that up there, but he was in the original conversations, and everything he said was correct. And I still don't think he should have left the room because his insight is very unique to all of this.
Clayton, your thoughts? Could I invite Shane back into the room?
Yeah, I think it's fine.
Yeah, this is. I mean, we don't actually make the laws in here. We're just having. This is a subcommittee meeting.
Right. He just doesn't want to have any perceived influence.
You know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't see that the ownership is, creating at this point, at least based on the discussion topics, any sort of substantial personal or financial conflict that Mayor Furman would have.
He's coming back.
Thank you, Clayton.
Yeah. We need your insights on this.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
Thank you for being cautious.
You got it. I got nervous. I was like, I don't know.
There's no need for that. There's no need for that.
I mean, I advocate for more stringent rules on myself, so that's fine.
I agree. We all do.
Yeah.
So it
Well,
sounds
I don't
like
know why Shane left, but I'm back.
we're talking about kind of the AROD district and the historic district and potentially how to deal with those with this committee as far as the AROD district goes. If we wanted to combine them, it sounds like we don't want to combine them with the historic district, but we would like to keep them separate, but still have them reviewed by this committee. Is that correct?
Yeah, different standards, same review process.
Okay.
Okay.
And
also,
a little bit more teeth.
yeah. And I think if you haven't already, it'd be good to get input from the housing, from Anthony as well, to make sure that like whatever he's thinking for the development of housing for the town fit. You got a dog barking.
Yeah, that sounds good. I will talk to Anthony about that one. And then we'll likely have to, I don't believe we have separate standards for them right now. I know we have standards for Blair Street and Green Street, but I think we'll probably have to develop design standards.
Well, I think that is the difference. It's the Blair Street and Green Street is the overlay district currently, historic overlay district, and the AROD is the south end of Green Street around the Y and possibly something to the north, but I think it's mostly just that south chunk.
But do they have separate design standards?
I believe they do.
Yeah,
We
it's
have-
a
we
few
have
bullet
maps.
points in the codes. Is the design standards. So.
Yeah, Jim was saying we have maps that show the difference between the two.
Yes, we do, and I have them here too. If anyone wanted to see them. Okay, awesome. And then on that note, would we like to include the current design standards in the codes that we have adopted right now?
Like the builder's handbook?
We have separate design standards in the codes that are just like bullet points, basically. And so we have separate ones for A-Rod and the historic district. And then we also have the builder's handbook, which I guess is, Katie could speak on this a little bit too, but it's kind of more like a tool, how we've interpreted it.
Yes, and I would say all those definitely we're going to recommend get updated during our code and assessment that we're currently putting together for the town. So I'm hesitant to say too much on how much in depth to put in the code right now. I do think you want those documents still, especially that was good for me to hear, especially your thoughts, James, on the background of that A-Rod district and why it's there and how important it is to the town still on design requirements. And so I think that also reinforces the need for these extra documents. But I do think there's a lot of confusion when reading them and trying to interpret them for the commissions and committees who have to read them. So I'm in support of having regulations. I'm not necessarily in support of continuing the ones that you're using. I would almost, with this ordinance and this historic committee, come up with a maybe more clearer, stricter ones that of what you want to see. And so there's not so much vagueness and kind of miscommunication is not the right word, but they don't go together very well. And you reference a builder's handbook that references a builder's handbook in it. So I still am confused over how that's the builder's handbook. So just a lot of confusion in those documents. So definitely you want to keep regulations. I just am a little cautious in saying, go ahead and put all these development standards in your code right now, because I think they need some thought. And I don't know if Lucy in the town has the time and effort to put into that thought now, or if you want to put that into the future code amendments that are going to hopefully be done with the town in the future.
I'm completely in support of not including the current standards in the code.
Yeah.
But I guess my question is, like with an uncertain timeline, or what was our, because we knew what our like kind of code revision timeline looked like, but that put us through to 2024. So over the next 18 months, what do we do if we have this adopted with like reference to these other documents that are in development? But we're providing the guidance to this committee and the planning commission that we don't totally agree or understand the builder's handbook as it is and the other requirements. So what do they have to go by over the next like 18 months?
And if the builders, I would maybe at least reference the builder's handbook as it's titled, if nothing else. And
Gotcha.
then when it all gets, so you have that, but then you're not actually putting that into a lot of the code sections. You're just referencing it. And that's how the A-Rod district and other overlays right now, they reference these documents and then you go and you look at them. That's why I'd rather have the reference than all this standards go into the code right now. And I would just say, instead of calling it the builder's handbook, call it by the title that's on that document. It's my just general personal recommendation for you. So.
Okay, so let me just make sure I understand kind of what we're saying here. So for the next 18 months, since we don't have a code rewrite ready at the time that we're going to have this committee who's going to need something to lean on as they're making decisions about current projects in town, a stopgap measure is to reference the code currently and the builder's handbook, whatever it's called. In the meantime, we're rewriting and ultimately pursuing something that will be more clear and helpful for the people who are on the committee and the planning commission and the owners of the properties that are trying to figure out what to do. So we're saying it's better to have something in this document than nothing at all.
Correct, because or else unless there's specific standards that Lucy can pull in from CLG directly, you need something for them to be reviewing, because you don't want them to be making opinionated decisions to the property owner. So you don't want the property owner to come in and say, hey, I'm in your I'm in the historic district, I'm going to make a renovation. And you don't want people's individual thoughts to say, okay, well, you need to do this, this, and this. And the property owner say, why? Like, have some.
I mean, I
more
think that's
guidance.
happening now.
So,
Yeah.
and that's where
And-
that document is a little bit tough right now, but I agree, it was a good point. You do need something, so you need to use that. Cause I don't think the town, and Gloria can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think the town's at the point to just go ahead and write a new set of regulations for a historic review. But that's up for the town to discuss and think about.
And on that point, a few pages down in the review criteria for these applications, it says they need to be in compliance with the design guidelines adopted by the town, which would be the way we were talking about it, the builder's handbook and the current codes, as well as the Secretary of Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties. So that does add additional review criteria. And I've linked that too. So that's just also there, but it's not Silverton specific, which I think is where we want to go.
Yeah, I think that those documents, in the feedback that I've received from members of the community who have gone through this process, and Jim and Shane are obviously much more intimately connected with it than I am personally, but it's been really complicated to try to interpret that particular cocktail of documents because there's, conflicting information or opinionated, information that's kind of couched, or opinions that have been couched as information. And I think as long as we're shooting to go beyond that and create something that's more in line with what the community vision is really striving for, I'm comfortable. I obviously don't want to leave. I don't want to like wave our hands in the air and be like, okay, if you want to build something gaudy, now is the time to do it. You have 18 months, get it through, and then it's over. But I just want to go, be really careful about saying, like, we recognize that there are weaknesses to mixing these documents, and we're ultimately, the target is something that will be an improved experience for everybody. More helpful for the committee, more helpful for the owners of the projects.
Awesome. That makes sense. Okay. Then moving on to designation procedure. This is to designate a property in town for the town's historic register. And this is pretty nice because it just lays out the exact procedure. And later we'll also see the application for review procedure as well. So that will be good for that. And this is pretty straightforward unless anyone has any thoughts on this.
The thing that jumped out at me, because it's right at the top, is applications shall be submitted to the planning department for consideration on a form provided by the committee.
Mm-hmm.
Should this just be submitted directly to the committee?
So we could do it that way. The way that we do like our applications is that the planning department would do a staff review. So
Planning department, I'm sorry, I was thinking planning commission.
oh, okay.
I just read that poorly.
Okay, yeah, so
I'm
we go to staff and then committee.
Great.
Okay,
We're good.
awesome.
Lucy wants to do some online forms for this. I'm
Yeah.
seeing my other notes in here.
We're gonna do some online, really easy, user-friendly forms. Yeah, this is also gonna require us to make a lot of new forms, which can also be a discussion for another time, but I think that is gonna help a lot with our process kind of conversations that we're having in town.
What are the how important do we think this section will be in application or in practice? Like, do we actually think that we will end up with new historic districts in Silverton? Because that's what this relates to, right?
This would be to designate a property or a district, but this will most likely be
Property
properties
specific.
as a historic in the town. Currently, we have national and Colorado historic properties, but we don't have a town register.
Got it.
So, and anything that is on those is immediately eligible and can go straight through. And then anything that is not will go through the town and will be approved by ordinance.
And so the reason that someone would request this designation is to be eligible for other grant funding or?
Yeah, to be part of our register, they are eligible for that grant funding and that waiving of that match.
And are properties that are already on the historic register automatically included, or is this a process that every single property owner needs to go to once we get our CLG designation?
They'll need to be adopted, but they are eligible. So we'll need to write out an ordinance for all of those, and we could do it mass.
So I see that as being potentially really bad process wise, because what I imagine will happen is we adopt this and I don't even have a guess at how many buildings we have that are currently on the historic register or considered historic. But, I'd guess north of 50, probably more like 120. Like if you really think through the whole town, like oldest house that's still like is historically like intact, all of Green Street, all of Blair Street, everything around the train depot. So if the owners of these properties are relatively diligent, you're going to get, 50 to 70 applicants within the first 6 months that this is adopted.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to create a massive backlog while we still have all these other things to do. And so I'm just wondering, is this a mandatory process or it is? There's no.
Yeah, for the CLG, this is the mandatory process. This is part of the survey and then reading that register, the local register.
Are there fees associated with this application to pay for all of this admin time that the town's going to end up needing to commit?
Not right now.
Isn't a lot of the work already done from the other registers?
That's what I was gonna ask. If something,
Isn't there
it
a lot
looks
of
like
cutting
if
and
it's,
pasting?
yeah, if it's already been approved, can we eliminate that a special designation approval from the town or make it like a really easy, if you've been approved on the other registers, check, you're done, you're out of here?
Yes, I believe you wouldn't have to go through the process of seeing the historic review committee, but you would still have to go through the ordinance process and you would have to tell the town you wanted to do that. And we'd have to get all the information for that. So it would still be work.
Still, yeah.
And then we still have the notice requirements of notifying all owners with 300 feet. Is that similar to the planning commission application where the application is going to say you need to, submit
Envelopes
with stamps with the address for everybody within 300 feet? And that has to go out and we're going to mail that out, even though they're stamped. It's still a thing we have to stuff and send.
Yes. Yep.
Is it possible that we can do a public hearing for 50 of these at once?
Yeah, I think.
Can we just
Yeah, we
mass?
do a mass one, as
Mhm.
Lucy was saying, we can
Got it.
do all in mass.
Is it possible? Here's a crazy question. I don't know if this is a due process problem, which is probably more of a Clayton question, but can we just provide this form to everybody, have a workshop with town where people, we have one evening where people get informed, submit their form, and then we assume that we've captured at least 50% of the eligible businesses, especially if this happens in June or something when everybody's here. And then we provide a public notice to everyone in the town that this mass hearing will occur so that we can avoid having mailings go out to everybody multiple, imagine if
A registration night.
because I'm just wondering if there's a way for us to take on this rather than having to facilitate the mailing of, 300 letters, much of which are going to be duplicative. Because the owner of, the Wyman, me, and the owner of the building next to me, both going for the designation, are going to be notifying the same people.
Mhm.
Like, can we just take that obligation as the town to provide notice to everybody that a public hearing with respect to this is going to happen all at once?
Yes, but many of the envelopes that we send go to people out of town because we have a lot of property owners that do not live in town. So public notice would cover everyone in town, but not everyone out of town.
True. Good point.
So I guess we'd still need to go through the process of collecting all of the, like the spreadsheet that has all of the people on notice. And maybe we could at least eliminate the local notice addresses, do one newspaper notice, and then we'd only have to submit, like, this could be adapted for the very first one, that it's that process for out of town notices or sorry, out of town notices.
Yeah, I think that would probably take like half an hour for me to do is to get all the addresses and then delete all the duplicates. But we would still have to find a way to, the burden technically is supposed to be on the applicant. So we would still have to find a way to get the envelopes from them, or we could just waive that fee and we just send them out as a town.
I'm thinking less about how hard it is for like an applicant to do it. And I'm thinking about how annoying it is for the town to mail out like 25 letters to Shane Furman because I have a building that's in the middle of the historic district.
Right. Well, I think that we could do the public notice for people in town and then send out the out of town letters. And that would probably take like a half an hour to an hour.
And also trying to figure out how we can make the admin of this go from like 150 potential hours to like 15.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Okay, and then also, what if you're wrong? Like, I didn't read this and look at it as like, this is going to suddenly be a huge, like, are we anticipating this to be a huge rush to register buildings because the grant availability is just that good, or is that where that assumption is coming from?
Well, my assumption is there's really no detriment to it. Like, all of these buildings already are historic. So like getting this local designation doesn't create any like additional, besides this application. It's like, there's nothing else that restricts the buildings beyond what they're already restricted by. And then there is a lot of funding right now that may not be available in 2 years or 3 years. And so it's kind of like a mad dash for who can get the most funding as soon as possible. And so I think anyone who's paying attention is going to do it. And it probably will be less. It'll probably be like 30 or 40 applications right out of the gate, not like 75, because there's a bunch of people who just won't be aware, no matter how much publication.
Yeah. And I hear 30 or 40 is still a lot. Yeah. Okay. All right. Just checking.
But I agree with Sally.
Yeah.
Really, I don't know if there's going to be this. And there's already historic designation. I guess that's where I'm trying to better understand the historic designation for our
for the town
is our national. Then we also have the state level, but it encompasses the entire town and everything in it. So, and that includes the particular buildings themselves.
So this,
so there has to be an added benefit to having a town designation versus like someone who's going to go through that process to get the Colorado or the national.
And my understanding is that there's a very material benefit, so as a CLG and the local historic designation, like right now, any historic designated property can apply for a grant with the National Historic Fund, up to, I want to say $250,000, but for a private entity that requires a 50% grant match, if we get registered under the CLG designation locally, there is no grant match. You can just apply for the $250,000 and just get it. And that's why.
Okay, that's substantial.
That's why we're pushing for this. Like, pretty much. I mean, that's one of the biggest reasons why we're pushing for this.
Right.
That's really helpful information.
Agreed.
But I'm wondering.
Sorry, I missed that.
if we can't look at our survey being part of the application process, so if we did our survey, and maybe this is a question we can ask Lindsay, but as part of that survey, can those buildings that we survey be kind of already in the application process, so that if there is this mass thing, at least we already have it all surveyed and ready. And so if they're on our survey, it would just be for buildings outside of that survey that would want to join in.
So they would, everything that's included in that survey would get the automatic addition. They would go onto our registry automatic.
So that's what I'm wondering, if that's how we can facilitate that kind of mass initial sign on.
I think there's two, it's the two is like, how can we get everybody signed up as quickly as possible? And how can we not be overwhelmed if we're successful in getting everybody to sign up as quickly as possible?
Yeah, I think that's one we're gonna have to ask Lindsay on for advice. And I'm sure she probably has an answer for us at some point, so.
Totally. Okay, I will ask Lindsay on that one. Any other notes on this section?
I didn't know, Lucy, if you were gonna ask if it was decided if you want to stick to 300 feet or if that's a bit.
Oh,
excessive.
yeah. Yes. Good point. So right now, current standards are when we notify landowners, it's either 150 feet or 300 feet. The more standard is 300 feet. That could be taken out too. They do ask that you notify adjacent landowners, but 300 feet is kind of up to us.
And I'll just throw out there, just adjacent, definitely you want to let people know who are adjacent. If you're doing 300 feet, you're including a lot of property owners who then, for good or for bad, think that they have rights to go have their opinion listened to, which everyone does, but do they have a right to say, I don't want this to be in the historic district, but I live 285 feet away? And do they have a certain reason to be going to object to it other than being a community member and having that right no matter what? So I think 300 feet is a lot for a review that's for an advisory review also for a committee. I'm just going to throw that out there. Obviously 300 feet is completely fine if the town wants to do it, but I feel like it's pretty large and encompasses a lot of properties who you're basically giving outreaching and saying, here, come talk about this and tell us what you think, but we may not be able to listen to you because we're looking at our standards. So just keep that in mind.
Like 300 feet on the east side of Greens, or on the west side of Green Street, would include all the way to the west side of Reese Street. And that's nuts. So yeah, I think we should go with whatever the minimum allowed is here, especially since I don't think the historic designation has a negative impact on neighbors.
Yeah, we could do directly adjacent, which would just be the lot surrounding.
Well, and that significantly reduces the concerns that I had about mailers. And now we could just forget about that and go back to the property owner being responsible.
Okay.
And I would say adjacent and across the public right away, just to get the people across the street. They should be considered adjacent also. So.
Okay. Awesome. Okay. Great. And then, and I guess another thing, just after looking at that note, another note I made below that is right now the town does absorb the fees for notification. We could change that so that the nominator, it takes that expense. I guess that's a budget question.
Yeah, and I think this is going to address a lot of our, we do want to approach you all at some point to talk about pass-through fees. And we've talked to, I think Katie, we talked about this too, the pass-through fees and potentially not having the town eat the cost for every application, but we could put stipulations in there if like they're offering housing or something like that, then we could help with those pass-through fees. But I think that's a much larger conversation that we're going to need to have as a board.
In this particular instance, what do you think the volume of cost would be per application to the town? Like even just rough ballpark.
$35.
Yeah. So, I mean, does it make sense just make it a $50 fee and then we're like,
And it's covered.
that doesn't seem like an insurmountable amount to pay for this application that makes you eligible for a lot of free grant funding.
Okay. Cool. I like that plan. Okay. The next page, is everyone okay with that page? The next page goes over kind of what that review looks like. And so basically they get the application, they'll approve it, approve with conditions or deny. And then after that, it goes to the Board of Trustees as an ordinance. And so the Board of Trustees would have to sign off on the ordinance. But it really gets approved there unless you decide not to sign that.
So should we just add the word recommend in 3B for each of them?
Because you have the last say on the signing, sure.
Since we shifted it.
Mhm. Okay. All right. Any other thoughts on this section?
See if the committee denies the application. Well, they're recommending denial. So is D also different? Because if they recommend denial, then it still comes to the board with the recommendation of denial as opposed to just getting denied at the committee level. The only reason I think the committee can deny an application without coming to the board is if it's incomplete.
This is for designation.
Never mind.
Yeah, no, it's super confusing though. The next one is for the application. If they got denied, they would have to appeal to the Board of Trustees to get that designation.
Got it.
Which is similar to the current process right now.
Yeah, it would be a similar appeal process to like an application.
Then I take it back. I was just confused.
Okay. Okay, and then section 5, now this goes into the review of alterations or new constructions within the historic district. So this one is a little more kind of, I think, what we've been talking about. One thing to note is I know a lot of communities that they have different levels for their committee. So if you have a minor alteration, for example, a new front door, that could be done on a staff level. If you have a major alteration, a facade improvement, that could be done, that could go through the whole process or part of the process. And then a major change, for example, new construction could go through, would have to go through the entire process. So that's just one thing to think about. The way this is laid out is everyone would have to do everything. So if you were going to do a minor facade improvement, you would have to, present us a site plan. So if you go down to the application, it shows what would be required. And this is based off of what is currently required. And is pretty similar to what we have and just kind of lays out the procedure.
I like the idea of the different levels, but I think the complication there is having sufficiently detailed lists so that those levels are objective.
Mm-hmm.
So like I know, for example, a lot of places like replacing windows is not considered a minor alteration, but if like the door example was given and not windows, it could be interpreted one way or the other depending on who they're talking to.
Right. And we could reevaluate this too if it became an issue.
But I think it'd be really frustrating if you're like changing something super minor and you have to do a whole site plan to just like do a minor update. That said, like I know like Durango, for example, has paint color specifications, and I don't believe we have any like paint color specifications. And that's something that requires an entire process. And they have like pre-approved palette colors. And then if you want something different, you have, like, if you choose one of the approved palette colors, no process. You just submit a form that says, I'm painting and I'm using, you know, whatever the code is for that color. And they just say, okay, fine. But if you want something that's different than a pre-approved color, then you have to go through the entire process. And I think applying that to this like scale of alterations, like if it's something that's on the list of minor or pre-approved, then expedited. If it's something different or bigger, full process. But there's a little more work to do then to figure out what's on that list and what's not on that list.
And we could look into this as we do our design standards too, and kind of develop that system as we do that. And we'll, at the beginning, do it this way. Okay.
I think we already have some similar things, like a 6 foot or less fence anywhere in town doesn't get any type of review.
Right.
But anything taller than that goes through a review process. I do think in the historic district, we should make even like a less than 6, like the style of the fence probably is impactful and should be included as we tighten things up a bit.
I agree. Just like the door is not a big deal, but the windows are, because the windows are historic. And they have to be double hung and all these things. No, I agree.
It sounds like for now, we should just keep it with this process
Which one?
and keep it with anything you do, or kind of like what we have now. Unless it's a maintenance issue, it will go through.
Then work towards those design standards, to make it a more simplified process, right?
Yeah, and when we can kind of create the list and show what would be pre-approved versus not.
And perhaps that's something the committee could actually help with.
Yeah.
I think there's still got to be some type of like de minimis level of updates that shouldn't trigger this.
Okay.
But I don't know how to and unless it's impossible to define what that is in a reasonable way, because I'm just nervous that, you know, we adopt this.
Can you give an example?
Say that again.
Can you give an example?
Fixing
agree with
rotting
you.
window trim.
I'm trying to
something.
think through.
I know, I was trying to think of this too, like run through some scenarios. I was actually trying to think about how could it work with, rather than trying to name all the things that fall into the expedited category, just trying to think about like how could an expedited categorical process be faster, so that, I don't know, maybe there's something a lot that could, you know, if all you're doing is fixing some trim and you're putting it back to what, you're not substantially changing the look of the trim, or I guess that falls into maintenance, but window boxes or something.
Well, I'm thinking
is
about
coming
like,
to mind.
it's still kind of like a maintenance, but like the wood facade at the front of the Wyman is in awful shape. It was like cheap plywood that got put in at some point. It's
Totally.
super warped,
Yeah.
like, it's in rough shape. When I replace that, hopefully soon, you know, to whether or not it is required to keep the exact same aesthetic is an interesting question. Or like right now, the windows are wood framed. If those were to be metal framed, does that shift from wood to metal? A full review or partial review? That probably is a full review. If I just replace the wood, but it looks the same, like should that, like, I just don't know. It was
Currently, it would be full review.
yeah.
Right.
But I'm saying if I replace everything, but commit to making it look aesthetically identical, is it still a full review?
As it's written now, right?
Because
Yes.
you're using different materials, so therefore you've triggered the review.
Could there be a cost trigger? Like above a certain price point?
Like imagine someone who's like only like they're gonna paint the front of the building themselves and they go like full geometric mural that looks super modern, like, you know, that
Yeah.
can be. So cost doesn't
It could be
necessarily.
very low cost, but high impact. I know. I'm just trying to think of like, what's the common denominator?
And some communities will do, if you're replacing like for like, kind of along what was the question was, then it would be an administrative review or not needed. My only concern with that, and this is more of a question for the group, is if you had that, are you encouraging people to replace what already is there, but it's not historic, where you may want to actually have it replaced in a different manner for that?
Yeah, where someone could actually improve the
and
product.
So if you say go like for like, are you going to encourage people who will just consider maybe they have cheap materials and colors right now, and they're just going to do that because it's free and easy and get out of it?
Yeah.
So that would be the only other thing to consider, but I don't know if that will backfire on you based on where you think the existing structures are that you're picturing. So.
Yeah, I think I'm leaning towards being more administratively stringent for like the next 10 or 15 years. And then like, once all these things have been sufficiently spread out through town and things are nice, and then it's like, then like for like probably makes a lot of sense. But I totally agree. There's a bunch of stuff that's like, we wouldn't approve it again today if they asked to do what currently exists.
And we'll all be living in spaceships in 15 years, so it's fun.
Yeah.
Oh, geez.
Historic.
Okay, I think we go with more administratively difficult for now until we've got all of this stuff dialed.
I agree.
Plus, we'll know what sort of things people are bringing to the committee. Like, we'll have a better sense of like, what is it that people are wanting to do?
Yeah, I like that plan. Anything else on this process? You'll see I have a standalone committee option and an advisory committee option, and I will just delete the standalone committee option. But the way this is written is pretty similar to what is currently required. I think we'll probably create a new form for this. We'll probably adjust the requirements. I have them laid out right now. As pretty much what we currently have. So I guess we probably won't adjust it that much, but it's open to being adjusted right now. And this is something I'd want to talk to the planning commission about. And you will notice there are no timelines in this process. That is another change.
Do we notice that as a improvement or a?
Katie can speak on that.
I would say it's an improvement. I think when you have timelines in the code, it makes it very difficult for staff. And leaves sometimes the applicants to have expectations that cannot be met, because especially when you get things that aren't complete, and therefore they still think that they should be going, and then you have a board who doesn't review what they want to see. So I think that there has to be an understanding that staff will keep things moving and everything will go as fast as it can, smoothly as it can. But we don't recommend timelines in codes, because I think they backfire on the community and also the applicants. I think Lucy, you put in a 10-day for completeness, which even you could do less, but we do have we're going to take this, we're going to review it quick, but you don't have to put it on a meeting within 30 days is what we're suggesting be removed.
Right.
Normal in your code. I should clarify that a little bit. We have it that it's going to keep moving and there's some thresholds, but nobody is being told you'll be on a meeting within 30 days of when you submit an application, because what I think Silverton is currently seeing is a lot of applications that expect to be on in 3 weeks. And they are, because the code says they can be, but you're not getting a very good review and you're not getting good application materials because the town doesn't have time to collect more information, essentially.
Right.
What happens if there's a future version of us that isn't composed of those like who's currently composed in the town staff, and the community gets really frustrated with getting put off indefinitely.
Mhm.
I think that comes down to the town staff and the board to make that clear, and basically come down on the town staff that that they need to be moving this process forward. I think yeah, I'll leave it at that. So I don't know if anyone wants to add any more, but.
Yes. Well, I just want to ask the question a little bit differently.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
like a year and a half ago, we were thinking about like aspirational, like what could we possibly get to, and how can we plan for what life is like if we accomplish all these goals as we're like adopting these ordinances and things. And now we're in a better than expected aspirational place, but it may not be sustained for 10, 20 years or whatever. So like, even though our current construct is very positive and the framework of making decisions is based on our current construct, how can we also anticipate some variation in that? And does this sufficiently do that?
I think it does, because I think also things are getting more streamlined for you and for the people in the future. So for example, whereas right now, what does a person submit? And it's a little bit vague, the applications, you have one application that aren't even, it's got one title, even though you can have different things that aren't really a use for special review. Lucy's going to be working on application checklists. So all of a sudden, anybody in the future, even the planning commission, a member, can say, okay, is this a complete application? Here's my check boxes. You gave us what we need, everything. So I think everything is actually getting set up for the town to be processing everything quicker and easier and smoother. And also for the applicants will actually know what they have to submit. And that's a big twist right now, is what do they submit? A lot of it's opinionated in the past, and kind of, we think you should do this. I think this is the way that the code says. And everything's being made so much more concrete and clear and openness to everybody, including the applicants and property owners, that everything will be quicker and easier in the future, because it'll be a smooth process. You want to submit for this district, here's an application and here's a checklist. Whereas right now it's, well, let me find that. We have one application, and then, our planner, and I acknowledge this, I say, well, Lucy, I actually think I need to see 5 more documents. And it's not written anywhere, so it puts Lucy in a bind. But this is all getting written out into clear outlines, so the future will become really streamlined for you.
Cool.
Does that help?
That's great.
Okay.
Awesome. Well, any other comments on the process or the requirements? Okay. After this section, it goes into relocation of listed properties and demolition of listed properties. And those are also pretty straightforward and something the town has not seen much of, at least relocation. But yeah, you'd have to go through a review to do that. You'd kind of have to explain why you were doing that. And then section 8 is, I should have brought this up before, but alteration exemptions. So reasons why you would not have to go through the process, but it's more based on economic hardship. Maintenance requirements, unsafe, dangerous conditions exemptions, and enforcement penalties. And then if anyone has any comments on any of those, but those are all pretty straightforward and pretty just kind of by the books. And this meeting's been going on for a really long time. I'm sorry, this took a lot longer than I thought. But if people have any other comments too, or want to read over this again, this is still a working document and can always be adjusted. And I will be going to the Historical Society as well as other historic preservation stakeholders to talk about this. Katie and I will probably workshop it more. And then I will be talking with Lindsay a lot about what we have.
And I want to say thank you for having me on here because it was actually really helpful to hear Lucy go through it and also to get all of your opinions and kind of a little bit more perspective of Silverton and especially your thoughts from the Board of Trustees standpoint. So I appreciate the time today to have me on here too. So thank you. Lucy, one side note, and this is just, I'm sure you're on top of it, but make sure you're working with Clayton on how certain sections of the code may need to be referenced to come out or cleaned up. And I'll let you guys handle all that on the legal end, but just make sure, what we want to make sure is if this moves forward, you're not adopting an ordinance that contradicts something that exists and leads to more confusion. So
Right.
I'll leave that, Clayton, for you to think about, but.
So thank you. And Katie, thank you for coming and answering questions. That was really helpful.
Jim? Jim, did you have something?
No,
Okay. Oh, is it just a thumbs up?
Yeah, this is awesome. Katie, thanks for joining us. Lucy, rad work. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Awesome. All right. I think we are ready to adjourn after 2 hours. So thank you all for your time, Sally. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a good
Yeah,
evening.
thanks, everybody.
All right, we are adjourning at
Okay.
4:28.
Bye.